All right, good day, hi, and welcome. Okay, for those of you that follow my channel, because of my charming personality, that's probably none of you. That's probably, let's be honest here, no, that charming, no, that doesn't. Quirky, weird. What the hell is this whack job up to today? Yeah, you follow me for that. I know that. I know you follow me for that. But some other stuff you follow me for is my insight, my intellectuals. All right, so my intellectuals today is going to be talking about submarines. Let's dive into this. See what I did there? See what oh God, see what I did there. All right, so I talked about the soft gripping versus the F-35, which I feel is something that can be talked about on YouTube without censorship, but you never know because everything's so damn political. Um, but submarines is something that I'm very fascinated by submarines. Now, I never served in the military, but when I was a young man, between 18 and 20, I did apply to the military 2 or 3 times. They told me I was too stupid 2 or 3 times. Back then, before there was wars everywhere, they were like, we're only going to take the smartest, right? So I didn't have my grade 10. I had to go get my grade 10. So I went and got my grade 10 with the idea that I might join the military, become a sniper, a tank guy, a fighter pilot, or on a submarine, right? Canada at the time, this was in the 90s, right? So they were still using the Oberon class submarines, which we had 3 of or 17 of. Three in service for sure. But I think there might have been, I think what I might have misread is that there were 17 of them built and we had 3 of the 17. And those served until the Victoria Upholder class we got from the British, right? Which was a nifty little sub, but the Brits they basically had built them and then canceled the project because they built a couple of versions of it, right? What they called the Upholder class. We called it the Victoria class. Or they called it the Victoria class, and we called it the Upholder class, whichever way it worked. But they made a diesel electric version of the submarine, which is the version we had. But they also made a nuclear version, which I think they made 4 or 8 of those. And they went with those instead, but then those got replaced and whatever, and God knows if any of these submarines are still around or if they've been cut up. I don't know what the fate of those submarines has been. But there was 4 out of like 6 or 8 of these diesel electric ones, and we were going to basically buy them from the British. But however, the British just left them floating in the water, right, on just unmanned, whatever, while we were trying to get this deal, which took about a decade or whatever so to get. So by the time we opened the hatches on these things while they're still floating in the water for like 10 years, the salt water just basically corroded absolutely everything inside them, and they needed to be completely gutted and rebuilt. But we got the submarines fairly cheap. We got them under Kretschmer, but they were a disaster pretty much from right away, in the sense that everything had to be rebuilt, right? Predominantly, right? Because of the corrosion. So the maiden voyage across the ocean with the Chicoutimi, when they finally started coming across, the Chicoutimi had a fire on it. One man died, and the boat had to get towed back. So a really bad start for these submarines. We get them here, and they pretty much have to get completely overhauled, right? And eventually, they became an actually really good submarine. Very quiet, whatever. Problem is because the submarine that was the competitor to it would have been the French Scorpion submarine. The Chileans bought some, and we were going to buy some of those for us to replace these submarines back in the 90s as well, because they were a newer sub. It's just we procured our subs in the 90s, right? And that replaced the venerable Auburn class submarines, which were well overdue for retired because those were like a 1950s sub, right? They were a very cool looking U-boat. That's really what they were. They were just like the final variant of a U-boat is what they were. It's just they weren't German; they were British. But at the end of the day, they were a U-boat style. Um, they were a Cold War workhorse. They an advanced submarine for its time, but that was then. This is now. So the Auburn class submarines, I know one of them basically was put dry docked and put on display as a museum on the Maritimes, and I think maybe they did the same thing with the other two as well. So by this time, we have this submarine that has a capability that we've never had before, right? But the submarine's not to the full spec out. Like, it doesn't have the harpoon missile variant. Those don't get added. It's just basically 18 gigantic torpedoes and away you go. You know what I mean? And some sea mines. But it also was capable of laying down underwater cables and stuff like that for like anti-submarine stuff. So between the Kingston class and the Victoria class submarines, they were putting down these cables, and that's what they've been pretty much doing, and then patrolling the Arctic and all that. So they've been doing a lot for Canada. The problem is that they don't spend a lot of time at sea. They spend more time dry docked. Then disaster struck with the Corner Brook because there's 4 vessels. Okay, so the first vessel is the Victoria. That's the flagship, and it's now the Victoria Upholder class because it was the Upholder class with the Brits, Victoria with us, right? So Victoria is the first of the ships. Then there's the Windsor, the Chicoutimi, and the Corner Brook, right? These are the other 3 remaining vessels. The Corner Brook. Now, I'm not saying the Newfies did this, but it was their boat. Smacked the bottom of the ocean. Did a couple of $1 billion worth of damage, or a few $100 million worth of damage. And that boat basically had to get. Basically, they said, well, it's basically like a fender bender. It wasn't, write off. But we had the outer hull got breached. The inner hull was fine. However, the Windsor had hull integrity problems, which gave it a dive restriction to 50 meters, no more, which is not very good for a submarine. Means you can't evade. You know what I mean? You can't chase. You can't intercept or invade other submarines if you can only go that. That's not very deep. You would actually, from 50 meters, on a clear day, on a sunny day, you might actually see a submarine beneath the waves. You might see its silhouette. Even that, it'd be dark. It'd be hard to see, but you might actually see it. Right? It's only once you get down below 150 meters where it's just the black abyss where there's no light, there's no light whatsoever, so to speak. That's the only place where you can, that's where you got to be. You got to be that deep or deeper. Now, the actual dive depth to these submarines is basically operational is 200 meters is where it's supposed to be able to dive to. What's hull crush depth? I don't know. It might be 200. It might be 400 meters, right? But maybe like past 250, things start popping. I don't know. But safely, you could operate it down to 200 meters, which is most electric boat depth. For example, German U-boats were like 150 meters, 200 meters max. The American ones were around the same, whatever. So the Auburn class, those ones were probably between 150, 200 max. So the Kylo submarine, the Russian Kylo submarine, would be the counterpart to our Victoria class. And those, I think, had a 250 meter dive depth, operational dive depth. But we're talking Russian safety measure. According to what's safe enough for the Russians, which the Russians are probably, a little bit more risque, and stuff like that. But anyway, the Scorpion was similar, 200 meters, whatever. Now, the big nuclear submarines like the Virginia class, the Los Angeles class, those are like 400 to 600 meter dive depths. It's quite astounding how deep those, the Kula class, same thing, probably 400 meters. whatever. So very, very dive deep diving. The thing is below 200 meters is probably that's probably the depth where most submarines can't fire a torpedo. They can evade, but like the pressure is just too great, they can't fire a torpedo. So I don't know. That's classified on most submarines of what they're like. Maybe a Virginia class can fire a torpedo at 300 meters below depth, below the that deep. Maybe they can do it all the way down to 400. I don't know. Maybe the new like it's hard to say. Maybe they have to be like 50 meters or between 100 and 50 meters to fire a torpedo. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is. So each those things are usually classified. Sometimes you get okay, should be able to fire a torpedo at this depth. So that's something people don't consider. So it's not just how deep your submarine goes. Like if you're so deep that you can't open a submarine, a torpedo bay door and close it again, you know what I mean? You could lose yourself and your crew. So the specs are definitely an upgrade in comparison to what we had, because Canada's only really had three generations of submarines. Right after World War II, we had basically some captured Nazi U-boats, the C1, C2, and the C3. I think they were all Type 7s U-boats. And then we had some of the Gatto class, I guess it was called, American ones as a stopgap. And then it was the O'Brien for, until we got the Upholder class, Victoria class, right? So the Victoria class has been basically at sea since the late 90s, right? So it's been at sea for more than 30 years. And when we got the subs, they were almost 20 years old, right? They were built in the early 80s or whatever. And the Brits didn't use them very much. They didn't get a complete supply chain of parts and stuff like that. British submarines are plagued with the same problems that ours are. The Germans had, these new U-boats, U-31, 212, 214, and 414 U-boats, which are the Dolphin class. The Israelis got some. And the Germans still use them. Now, the thing about the German ones is they're really, really good, right? But even the Germans have a hard time keeping parts. It's not just the Navy cost. It's just like the supply chains aren't worked out well. The French with the Scorpines. Now the Scorpine comes onto the surface as a kind of a multi-rolled, budget submarine. India gets them. They build their own versions of them. The French have, I think, 3, and the Chileans have about 3. And the Chileans, we were going to buy those Scorpion subs back in the 90s when they were finally built from the Chileans, right? Because these things were, probably they were SSK class submarines, right? So similar to what we had. But they probably did it a little bit better in the supply chain, right? But now those submarines, there's not that many of them as well. I don't think there's more than, my last look at, there's not that many of them there. But the Spain, or not Spain, or is it Greece? Greece, anyway, one of these countries have basically a newer version. They call it something else, but basically you could call it Scorpion 2.0. And it's designed, this is one of the new submarines that are on the market today. The Russians have one that's called the Lada class. They call it something different for themselves, but the export model of it will be called the Lada class. And basically, we're obviously not going to be buying Russian submarines, but it's to replace the probably most numerous modern submarine built, and that is the Kylo class. So Iran has like I think three Kylo class submarines or two or one. India, I think, was the biggest importer of Kylo class submarines outside the Soviet Union. And now Russian Federation. Russian Federation built about 60, 65 of these things. The number, don't quote me on the exact number, but it's around that. In the world today, the all submarines added up is basically something like 400 submarines. Now, North Korea has a bunch of them. I think they got some Kylo class as well. China had some, I'm sure. So they're all over the place, right? The Russians, I don't know how many of them they're still running. They called them Karasador. They've modified them, but basically the way they modified them is basically, and this is a lot, like I say, the Russian equipment is always kind of the same, where they don't reinvent the wheel, they kind of refine it. So what they did is they had to make the Kylo subs be cruise missile capable, right? So I don't know if they've put a VLS system in the Kylos, but these Lada subs have 8 missiles that they can fire out of it, plus a handful of like a dozen 2 dozen torpedoes, and then a couple of surface to air missiles that they can do. The basically our subs were capable of having the design modified so that we could fire 4 harpoon missiles and for Sea Sparrows, right? And then the Mark 48 torpedoes. Now the problem is when we got when we got our subs was we were already using the Mark 46, 54, and 48 torpedoes, right? We actually, I think we make Mark 48 torpedoes up here in Canada. We definitely service them. The problem is the British subs came outfitted for the Swordfish, right? Which is the main British torpedo counterpart to the Mark 48. And I forgot the Russian one. I forgot what they call it there. But anyway, the problem is that the Swordfish, flying torpedo, but we didn't have them here. And the other problem was they were different diameters to the Mark 48s. So we had to basically modify all 4 submarines to be able to handle the Mark 48s, right? Which there's 16 or 18 torpedoes in there, or sea mines or whatever we're going to go with. So we didn't have the advancement of the Scorpion sub, which was probably one of the first subs that wasn't a ballistic missile sub to have be able to shoot, what's the name of the Exocet missile, the famous French Exocet, anti-shipping, anti-air, anti-this, anti-that. The Exocet missile, I think, can be armed like 11 different ways or something. It's the French have been using this missile for, they've got so many variants of this missile, it's not funny. But they had it was like a casing, would come up through the VLS tube, go through the surface, pop off, and then go the missile, and the Scorpion subs could theoretically shoot down aircraft or target other warships with a torpedo and a anti-shipping missile, right? So depending on how they were rigged up, and they had about 8 of those that they could fire. So the Russians now have a handful of these Lada subs that have 8 caliber missiles, cruise missiles, that they can fire, plus another 8, whatever their air defense missile is on that, on their diesel electric sub, and then 12 torpedoes, whatever. So it's a diesel electric sub about the same size as the SKS, but more capabilities. The Scorpions have some of the capabilities, right? Just not to the same level. But then when you look at the big subs, it's basically the 2 most strike capable tactical subs. Like strategic is nuclear, tactical is non-nuclear. But I guess you could, that's kind of a gray area nowadays because, cruise missiles can be outfitted with warheads, right? But the American Virginia class basically can carry a whole bunch of cruise missiles, right? Lots of them. The Los Angeles class could carry some. The Virginia is being replaced by the Columbia class, but these are all nuclear submarines, right? big, long blue water submarines, right? Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Russians now have the Yazan class submarine, which that thing carries about 40 cruise missiles and 16, like air defense, whatever missiles. Plus, it carries about 30 torpedoes and sea mines and decoys. And some of those torpedoes could be the they're under speed rocket torpedo. Torpedo. What the hell is it called? I just had it in my head. What the hell's it? It was when the Kursk was sunk. They were testing it. What the hell? Anyway, these things go about 700 miles per hour under the water. Basically, these torpedoes are what they call like a snap fire torpedo. You fire it, it goes out a bit, and then once it's on target, it blasts. There's blasts of like a gas bubble in front of it, and it goes. Yeah, like there's no stopping them. There's no countermeasures that'll stop them. They're a ballistic rocket that's underwater. These things have been around since the 90s. The name will pop into my head in a second, I'm sure. I get these brain farts all the time. I hate that. But anyway, what the hell are they called? Anyway, these Yazan class submarines, these brand new submarines that are coming out now, which basically the Russians have got three kind of new subs. The Bory class boomer subs, which they're building those. The Yazan class fast attack sub, which is replacing their aging Akula 2s and 3s. And have replaced the Oscar class and all that. And then, of course, they got these little diesel electric ladder subs. Now, Sweden has, I think it's the Gotha class subs. And these submarines in the Rim Pack have been known to basically get strikes on U.S. aircraft carriers because they're so quiet. Their air propulsion system that they use is like as quiet as a submarine can get. It's one of the quietest submarines ever known. And the thing is the Swedes are working on it, and the Norwegians are working on and I think the Danes as well, are working on a joint venture submarine known as the A-26. Not to be confused with the movie, but it's called the A-26. But it might not be out for a long period yet. So that one is not in the running for competition yet. But they're working on it. And it's kind of going to be like the Virginia class submarine has really changed the game, right? So it's like you got cruise missiles galore out of that thing. A little bit less of a hunter killer. Like basically, the Virginia class was working all the bugs out of the Seawolf, which was designed specifically as a hunter killer. But then the Soviet Union collapsed, and Seawolf was now built to fight an enemy that no longer existed. So they thought, right? Yeah, but look where we are today. So Seawolf, there's three of those. Okay, so Virginia class, I can't remember how many they built. If they built 20 of them, whatever. But now they're going to build the Columbia class and whatever. So Canada was looking at these Virginia class, but these were really expensive nuclear submarines. Would we be able to operate them, right? The cost of operation. But the French have also built two new submarines as well. And that is I call them the Barracuda class. They're called the Safin class or whatever, but it's they showed one off in Halifax, Nova Scotia there, right around when Trump made the threat to Canada, about a week after he had these French submarines. And they're nuclear-powered submarines, 30 torpedoes, 16 Exocet missiles, like a very fast, like I think one of the coolest submarines ever designed. So could Canada get some of those? Who knows? But what we do know is that the Virginia class that's still in production is no longer on the table for Canada whatsoever because of the Trump rhetoric and stuff like that, whether you like that or not, but that's the case, right? So what submarines are available for Canada? Okay, well, there's another little submarine that's available for Canada, and it comes from a derivative of the German U-boats, the new German 212s and 214s, and that is the KSS-3 Kensong, I think is what it's called, the Kensong, South Korean submarines. And these are nifty. They got four of those. They got about four of those. And these things, okay, when I looked at them, I'm like, these things are a no-brainer. If they work as good as advertised, they are a no-brainer. Now, the Japanese have their own submarines, but they're no longer in production. I forget what those ones are called. They look really weird. I'll just say that. They kind of have a bit of a... Well, they look like submersible dildos. I'm sorry if you're Japanese watching this, but it seems like that's what the Japanese submarines, they look like. When you look at them, they're kind of like, they're a bit vile to look at. It's like, what the heck did they build? You know what I mean? I don't know how else to describe them. But these little South Korean subs, these are nifty little things. These are relatively small submarines, slightly smaller than what we have right now. So we have an option of getting these. And then, of course, Germany is building a replacement for its current U-boats. I forget it's 412, I think is what's going to be called, the 412 or the 414. Don't quote me on the name, but anyway, this thing is cool. It is so cool, and that, like, there's nothing else quite like it coming out. And the closest that would be comparable to what would be similar to, if you look at some of the British submarines, okay, especially the Vanguard class, their nuclear submarines, they have a really weird shaping to them. It's kind of like, okay, did these guys just cut some corners? No, there's actually something that the British have been keeping a secret. And, you know, how they've been able to keep it a secret for so long, kind of interesting. But the geometry, that's kind of squared off geometry that you see on these British nuclear submarines, basically what it does is it deflects sound, kind of like stealth, away, so that it makes it harder to get a sonar return. So it makes it seem like the sub is further away than it actually is, right? And the Germans are going to build this stealthy feature into their new U-boats. So the Germans, okay, you have to understand, like, Canada, and again, Americans don't normally understand anything about Canada because, you know, Americans typically only pay attention to America, right? So, okay, fine, no problem, you know, not butthurt about this or anything. I'm just saying that's just a thing, right? So they're not aware of the industries that are in Canada. And you have to understand, like, okay, yes, 70 to 80 cents of every Canadian dollar spent on our military goes to the United States. But apparently to Donald Trump, we're fucking years over. And the reason for that is because, again, from the fall of the Avro era, we decided not to develop our industries, and we made a deal with the Americans that we wouldn't develop our weapons industries in favor of theirs. But the Americans build, like, the ship. Okay, they build the ship, they build the airplane, they build the tank, they build whatever. They build the big bulky stuff, right? But Canada typically offers, like, the hardware or the software side of things. Fire control systems, avionics. We're world class in that. Again, you wouldn't think of it because the news is, oh, Canada sucks, Canada sucks, Canada sucks. But it's just we're quiet. We're really quiet about our innovations. But when you start to realize the industry that's here, yes, it's smaller. We're not building the ship, but we build the torpedoes for the ship. Right now, Canada and Germany has been working on the Sea Spider, which is an anti-torpedo torpedo that can be dropped from, it could also be used as a regular torpedo, but it's basically an anti-torpedo torpedo, and they've been testing these now for about a decade. It'll probably be the replacement for the Mark 46. Which can also be dropped from helicopters, can be fired from submarines, fired from warships, fired from it's kind of like the super mini torpedo, we'll call it. And they've been working on these things forever, and they do seem to work. It's just the platforms that are out there right now need to be adapted to it. So you can get them off the helicopters. You know, they're already testing them, using them on the helicopters, but submarines, they need to have modifications to have these tubes to fire these things out, right? So that, if you got like some of these hyper torpedoes coming at you, you might have a chance. You know what I mean? In defense, it's probably the best countermeasure for a torpedo would be another torpedo, right? One that makes a lot of noise so that the torpedo hones in on it, so that they can run into each other and blow each other up. But you don't want to be close to these things when they do, because the concussion will destroy your ship. That's the thing about underwater. Like, a torpedo can blow up like 500 feet from your ship and still destroy your ship, right? The Mark 48 is not like World War II. The torpedo had to go into your hull and blow it up. But now the way it works is your torpedo goes about 10, 15 feet under the center of your hull, blows up there and creates a big air bubble and basically collapses your ship in the bubble and busts it in half, right? Through the explosion and then the cavitation. So basically the best way to destroy something is through cavitation, right? Who knew? The best way to create a big cavitation bubble is to basically blow a big hole in the water with a torpedo, and that creates a gigantic, cavitation bubble, right? And that's how they do it. And so we have available to us these submarines. So here's our availability. So there's that Spanish or Greek submarine that's currently being made. The French Scorpions are still also being made. French just wait for orders, that's all. The French nuclear Sufin Barracuda class, those are being made. The Russians with their 3 Bory class, they're building, and not available for export, but the Yazan class, not available for export, and the Lada class, which is available for export. So I'm just telling you which submarines are brand new. The KSS-3 from South Korea, the new U-boats that are being designed right now by Germany, but they're not in production yet. And then, of course, the Nordic, Swedish, Denmark, probably Finland. I know Norway and Sweden are in on it, and Denmark's in on it for now. They're still in the designing stages for that. But you're not going to see a prototype till probably after the mid-2030s. And then there's the new Columbia or finishing off with the Virginia-class submarines in the States. And I think that's it. I think that's all the new submarines that are going to be on the planet, right? So the thing is the choice has come down to 2 for us. The German submarine or the South Korean submarine. Now, looking at both submarines on paper is one thing, but actually seeing a physical submarine in the water, which the Germans have versions of what this submarine is going to be, right? It's a small 210-foot long submarine, which are the Dolphin class, which I really like those submarines. And I think they would be great for Canada, especially around the Grand Banks, because it's shallower there. Like shallow water submarines is what we need, especially in the Arctic. I'm not saying there's no deep water in the Arctic, but submarines that can operate in shallow water, such as the Caisson, the U-boats, the Scorpion, our current submarine, these are good submarines to have. The deep water submarines, the real big stuff, they're not going to do as well around the. Nobody wants to be. Nobody wants a submarine in the Grand Banks, for very long because of the nasty weather there. Basically, think of about a shelf that's only about 75 feet deep for about 75 miles off the coast of Newfoundland and New York and places like that. It's very shallow. This is why there's so many shipwrecks there during storms. But then it drops right off the shelf, and then next thing you know, if you're down on the eastern seaboard far enough, you'll end up in the Marianas Trench, which is pretty much bottomless, right? So the Germans right away, we could train on some of their submarines, cross-training, right? We're already doing stuff with them, with their Navy and Rheinmetall and all that. And the South Koreans, well, they're looking for partnerships. So we saw a Carney with his head sticking out of the submarine there about a week or two ago. But that thing has capabilities of firing up to 10 cruise missiles out of it. Maybe not huge cruise missiles, but cruise missiles nonetheless. And I don't know how, maybe I can imagine a submarine only 200 and some odd feet long would probably not have more than 12 torpedoes. And depending on what torpedoes, are we going to, like if we make these things able to fire the, like the South Korean subs, maybe they can only fire like 8 or 10 Mark 48s just because of the space availability, right? So that we don't know yet. But the idea to be able to hit land targets with your submarine is a great idea. Like right now, Canada is starting to build the Type 26 super destroyer, right? Known as the River class. And they're actually building them. They're finally building them. The first one, is the keel's being laid as we speak, right? How far they're along on this, I don't know. Construction started a few months ago or whatever. They finished up a lot of our Arctic Patrol boats. So the Harry DeWolf class Arctic Patrol boats are finished. I don't know if they're going to make 6 more Navy Coast Guard versions of these boats. There's talks of it, but I don't know. Because the Coast Guard is going to be getting icebreakers. It's going to be getting all stuff. We just built 9. I know they're questionable. There's some, questions whether these little, forget what the name of the speedboat. But Canada's building ships like crazy, right? To the point where we had to outsource some shipbuilding to Finland. Which, if we're going to outsource to a country for something like that, now mind you, it's partial outsource. I mean, a lot of the ship is still, inner workings of the ship are going to be built here in Canada. It's just because our shipyards, our 2 major shipyards, the Seaspan one out west and the Irving Ship Company in Nova Scotia, is full. One's building a destroyer, the other one's building a supply frigate, or supply vessels, which is the largest vessels built in Canada to date, which is these Procurer Protector class, right? So, and then the Quebec shipyard is going to be helping with the icebreaker stuff. So basically, South Korea or Germany will have to build these boats for us, unless we go with somebody else. But it looks like it's come down to these 2, which both are excellent choices. I don't really think it matters which one we take. I think the Kaesong has a little more advantages. I think it's called the Kaesong, but it's the KSS-3. I'll call it the Kaesong. So if it's not called the Kaesong, I apologize. But I think the fact that there's 4 of them out there, and this is the version we would be getting by 2035, which is 10 years, it's like, okay, that's not so bad, but we got to start training the guys up on them now, meaning South Korean, Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, well, the CAF, it's all Canadian Armed Forces now, even the Navy. But the Canadian Navy is going to have to start training on these boats, right? But let's say we say, you know what? The Germans, basically the South Koreans have copied a current model of German U-boat, and that's basically the 212 and whatever. Okay, so the Germans have 212s. Yes, they're having the same problems we're having with parts keeping their ships at sea, but maybe a joint venture, and this is what the Germans are talking about, is that, look, if you're helping us with the parts and we're helping you with the parts, we could do cross-training on both vessels, and, it's more to the pile. Maybe what happens is we train on the German U-boats with the Germans, okay, and they train on our Victoria class, okay, and in turn, both fund the project. We could have subs at sea a lot more, because what's happening is, like, our submarines spend like 3 days at sea and then they spend 3 weeks in maintenance, right? That kind of thing. So the goal of having 12 submarines is that by the time you're, if you got good part supply, you could send a submarine out on a 3-week patrol a couple of times a year. Okay, but let's say you got the Kaesong, which is more new, and it has a good part supply. Maybe you can keep 1 submarine at sea for the entire month. And the Kaesong has a really ridiculously long range for such a small submarine. you can be at sea for about 20 some odd days, right? So that it's submerged the entire time. That is really cool. Now, I think our submarines can do that now, but it's like this one is really, really good at it. So the thing is that if we can get, maybe what Canada does say, okay, how about this? We'll make a deal with Germany for now, that we're going to do cross training. So the Germans are having a hard time keeping their U-boats in the water, and Canada's basically, like when we bought these subs from the British, one of the reasons why we got such a good deal on them is there's no supply chain for parts. We've had to basically build all the parts ourselves, right? But we don't have a good supply on those parts. But maybe, just maybe, if Canada and Germany were to team up, we'll say, okay, we'll park the Virginia-class submarines for now, and we'll do cross-training. We'll take, of the, I think, 6 or 12 of these U-boats that were made, I know some of them ended up in Israel, and I don't really want to do anything with Israel because, it's Israel. But perhaps Germany right now is keeping its submarines from, dry dock because to keep the Israelis outfitted with their submarines and keep them operational, right? But maybe what we could do is say, okay, well, between Canada and Germany, we're going to share the German submarines. Okay, because their supply chain is a little better than what we have. Okay, we'll help you with the supply chain, you'll help us with the supply chain, and in turn, we'll cross-train so that at any one time, we have Germans and Canadians at sea so that the subs can spend the most time at sea, the least time in dry dock. But as soon as they get to dry dock, there's no wait time, the parts are there, and the things that, maybe it takes 3 weeks to completely... it seems like now it takes like 6 months to get a ship, a boat ready to go back in the water. It shouldn't take 6 months, but most of that is waiting for parts, right? So this could be a very, very good solution for Canada and Germany if they decide to do that, right? And then, okay, if we say, okay, well, we've looked at the caisson, we've looked at the German U-boat, okay, well, the German U-boat isn't there yet, but the technology going into that German U-boat is going to be very similar to what they have right now, which the caisson is based upon these U-boats, these 212, 214s, really, really cool little U-boats. Okay, let's do that. We'll go all in on that partnership. And the thing is that Germany and Sweden, one thing that they're offering us that the United States will never offer us, because the United States is keeping monopoly on its weapons industry. Fair enough. Okay, fine, whatever. So we get procurement from the Americans. That's it, and then a few jobs here and there to help with supply chain. Okay. But what the Germans are offering is the same thing the Swedes are offering, is that, no, it's not just about buying a product from us, and that it's going to be a whole service that, like, we're going to build, like, and then from the German point of view, this makes like total sense. It's like, okay, look, we could be going, if NATO goes to war with Russia, pray that it doesn't, but our world leaders are all kind of insane. They all kind of want this war for many reasons, bad economy, blah, blah, blah. They want the Great Reset. That's the best way to get it. Hit the World War III button. We're already in World War III. It's a shooting war. It's isolated to the Ukraine at the moment. But at some point, the Cold War fears could be, we're no longer in a Cold War. We're in an active war. And that could be played out. Russian tanks could roll across Europe at some point, or drones. We'll say drones. Russian drones are going to come across Europe. But if the Germans get into an ass-kicking contest with the Russians, and they have to rely on a supply chain, well, what do you think the Russians are going to be hitting first? Canada, doing airstrikes in Canada, or airstrikes in Germany? And where do you think they're going to be more successful, right? If we have a supply chain between Germany and Canada that's hardened on both sides, that we could supply the Germans with torpedoes. The homeland, the Rhineland is being under attack by Ruskies. Okay, fine. Send your U-boats over. We got torpedoes here for you. Back you go. We'll fuel you up. You can keep some staff here. You can swap your guys out. We'll hold the fort on the northern Atlantic here. You can, go into the northern Atlantic and the Baltics over there, join up with the Swedes, whatever. This could be a great deal for everything. Now, maybe we don't do it with the Germans, but we do it with the Swedes. But the thing is we're already intertwined with Germany and Sweden. Like, we already make avionics for soft grippins and stuff like that here. Again, as you find this stuff out, it's like, okay, well, it's the same thing with the Eurofighter Typhoon, right? We upgrade them here. We have a service station here for Typhoons. We have we make parts for the F-35. So we do a lot of this little technical stuff that everybody overlooks, and this is exactly why Donald Trump can't just flick a switch and shut off our economy, because it boomerangs back to the Americans, and they can't deal with that, right? Because if they shut off the F-35 program that we paid for. Right now we've made I think something like $4 billion or $40 billion or $400 million off the F-35. So of the probably $900 million that we put into it, we made about half back in profit by servicing the F-35 stuff, right? Which is about 1,600 jobs in Canada. Now, mind you, again, the Mark 48 torpedoes, we take care of our own Mark 48 torpedoes here in Canada, but we also service American ones. Right? So maybe Donald Trump was saying, like, look, the F-35s are going to be built in the States, okay, if Canada wants them, and then, well, no, sorry, I'm not going to blame Trump for this, but the deal that is made with the F-35, which predates Trump, is that we're going to get 16 of these aircraft, but they have to be the Block 5, which is the newest variant. Why? Because that's the ones with all the bugs worked out of. Normally what happens with Canadian procurement with the United States is, here's our worn out underwear, but you can still wear it. You know what I mean? So when we bought Voodoos from them, they had the F-4 Phantoms, we bought their worn out Voodoos. Their F-18s, however, we assembled and built kind of cross-border. The final assembly was in Canada, but we built some of these in Canada as well. So that was kind of more what Canada needs, is to be able to build them. That's why I always said, why not just see if we can I'm sure the tooling for the F-18s was still around, 10, 15 years ago when they were ready to be replaced. Then what we should have done is say, okay, well, let's start gearing up the tooling, and okay, well, whatever mods we want to make to the F-18, we already made mods on the ones we built anyway, the F-188s, CFA 188s. Well, we might as well have just kind of, okay, well, what were the common problems in the F-18? Okay, can we tweak the tooling to do that? This is what the Russians have done with the Su-27 so successfully. Now it's the Su-57, right? They just evolved this platform where the Americans just, it's like, no, let's right from scratch, let's build it from scratch, except for with the exception of 2 airplanes. And that's basically F-16s. So now you have the F-16 Viper, which is a modified version of the original F-16, and it's a Block 4, 5, or whatever, 6, 7, 8, how many modifications. Russians, when you see an M after an aircraft or a tank or something like that, that's modification, and it's like M1, 2, 3, so modification 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So the Americans, they use block. Okay, this is Block 2, Block 3, Block 4, and the higher the numbers, the newest, whatever the recent highest number is the newest variation. So for us to get those F-35s, Block 5s, okay, fine, that'll be the most newest version of the F-35, which is going to function better than the originals. We don't want the original F-35s. We'll never be able to fly them. They're broke all the time. The Block 5, the problem with it is it's already behind schedule. Like, there already is a backlog on it. So even if, and this is something that Mark Carney can do, is just, oh yeah, well, we're just going to keep the deal as it is, because chances are either Trump is going to cancel this deal on us for some whimsical thing anyway as a threat to Canada, saying, oh, well, you pissed us off here, so therefore, not only are we not going to do trade talks with you, we're going to cut off the F-35 program, which I kind of hope he does, because then, maybe we could soon get the rest of our money back that we wasted on this program so far. But we're going to lose the service station thing that was for the F-35s, which would be nice to be able to do that. But the thing is, the Americans, they won't allow us to have soft grippins and still be a part of the F-35 program, right? So they'll kick us out of the program. Why? Because they're not going to look at it as like, well, okay, well, here's our trusted partner. They're going to help us build an F-35 service station, which will create thousands of jobs probably in Canada, at least hundreds of jobs, and have the soft grippin as a second line fighter, or like a mixed fleet, right? They won't allow us to do that. And all these people, oh, well, we can't run a mixed fleet. We can't. Well, we can. We just have to prioritize, because we used to do that. We used to have 5 different aircraft at Voodoo, CF-100, F-35, F-105 Starfighter, the F-86 Sabres. Yeah, they were still, and then what else was there? The F-5. Yeah, we had 5 fighters that we were, basically all at the same time. Did it have its problems? Yeah. Right? Did we need all 5 fighters? Well, at the time, yeah, because that was the only way to get the numbers up. We had 350 starfighters. We had almost 700 Voodoos. We had almost 700 CF-100s, right? We needed the numbers. Why? Because the Russians had thousands. They had 13,000 MiG-20, 11,000 or 13,000 MiG-21s. Of course, some of them were exported or whatever, but 6,500 Frogfoots, 6,500 Su-24s, Su-22s, they had 4,000 or 5,000. MiG-23s, they had freaking 6,000 of those. Black Shark helicopters, Werewolf and Hawkem helicopters, 6,500 of those. The Russians had tons of stuff. Sure, most of it was junk, but it was like the Tu-22s. They had those were they had 500 Bear bombers. We needed those mixed fleets to get the numbers up, right? So anyway, getting back to the submarines have been overlooked for a long time, but I think the way the battlefield is, like, for example, we have a procurement for 15 super destroyers that we're making of the Type 26, but I think destroyers and stuff like that, I think what we need to do is, okay, maybe build 3 of them, okay, cancel that and build smaller frigates or corvettes. And just, like small corvettes would be better for Canada. Like the Swedish corvette, maybe modify it a bit. Like anything Sweden has is clever, right? It's small, light over might, and just use technical stuff, because the software is going to outrun the hardware. So the Swedish frigates, I think, would be a modified modern version of those. We could build them a lot faster. They're stealthy. And the other advantage that they have is that they're cheaper. We could have more of them, but more importantly, we could divert the money that we're going to spend from the super destroyers and put that towards more submarines. 12 submarines is not going to be enough for Canada, even if it is the Kaesong or these new U-boats. It's just not going to be enough. Now, I'm a fan of stopgap, right? And the problem is, as soon as you buy older stuff, you get this big, oh my God, it's outdated. We need the current thing. But the current thing's unobtainium. Like, even if tomorrow morning Donald Trump wakes up and he says, Carney, look, I'm sorry, trade deal's off. We'll give you a phenomenal deal on 140, a complete replacement of your CF-18s. 140, we'll give you them at $50 million a piece, F-35s. We'll give you the best deal ever. In turn, you help us with the building infrastructure, do this great thing, right? It's still 10 years out before you would even see the first one. That's the thing with the F-35. You can't get the F-35s now. They can't build them fast enough. The Chinese are popping out like a ridiculous about 10 J-20s a month. And now they're building the J-36, and they got the J-15, they got the J-31, new variant. They're building all these stealth aircraft. They're building ships more than anybody else in the world, right? And we're bickering about procurement in by 2035, 10 years down the road, right? Where you can buy shit now. Like I say, I'd rather have like go to Germany and say, look, okay, here, how about we do a Lend-Lease program of your remaining F4 Phantoms? Maybe they say we got 200 that are capable of flying. Maybe they say, no, we got all 400 of them. Okay, and they go to the British. Well, how many you got left? Well, we got 200 left that can still fly. Okay, now we got 600 of those. Maybe we have to, use those as more like flight training and just a backup. You know what I mean? Just to have the numbers, right? Maybe we, because like I say, the easiest thing to do would be say, okay, let's go see if we can track down, 2,000 old F-16s. you know what I mean? Something like that. And see if we could buy those, right? But we're going to have a mixed fleet if we want numbers, because Canada needs about 2,600 fighters. We need to have at least 50 to 80 submarines if we want to actually take on the Russians without a lot of pain. You know what I mean? We have to overwhelm the numbers, because we also have to have more than 68 to 69 submarines, because that's what the Americans had. And they may go to war with us, right? So you have to understand that we have to look at it like that and say it's very unlikely. It's probably about a 3% chance at this stage, but about 4 years from now, again, watch around the Great Lakes. Trump might make, especially if he takes office again in 2028. And I know what you're saying, Reggie can't. He's already done his 2 terms. That's it. No, Steve Bannon is out there saying, look, no, Trump is going to be in office again in 2028 because he needs that extra time to finish the job. Well, here we are, right? How is he going to get there? Well, something really drastic and disastrous has to happen for him to have the martial law to be able to cancel elections or whatever, or he has to make changes that are going to be, Civil War-esque in the United States, right? So who knows how he's going to do this. But when he does this, it's going to be against a very, very rough economy that the Americans are experiencing right now. There's a shock value that still hasn't hit the American populace, but it's creeping in very fast, and that's basically the disaster of the trade deals, wiping out businesses, increasing prices of stuff. Maybe not everything. You can't blame it all on that, because there was already crisis before. Because Canada, the United States, everybody's in Europe, we're all in the everything crisis that our world leaders have set up for us, right? So that's the backdrop that we're trying to outrun. But no, 12 submarines is a good start for Canada, but it's not going to be enough. What I would do is, if the South Koreans can have subs built by 2030, that's not too bad. That might be maybe we need to go with them because they can build it now. Okay, maybe when Germany starts putting in their new subs, okay, well, fine. We got to start looking we can't keep looking at procurement as 50-year-long endeavors. Okay, well, look, the B-52, okay, came out in 1954, 51, 52. Okay, that thing has been in the skies for 70, 80 years already. You know what I mean? It's time to retire the fucking things. You know what I mean? They just, like World War II, we had hundreds and hundreds of different fighter developed. The jet age, and again, there was hundreds of, a few dozen fighters at any one time. Now it's like all in on one type of fighter, all in on one type of submarine or warship or whatever. Where the Swedes, yes, they're all one in on their Gripen, sure. But the Gripen is designed to do as a true multi-role fighter, right? And now when they're talking about their submarines that they want to get in, well, it's got to be as clever, because the thing is the warship is going to go the way of the tank and the fighter jet. By the time we get these fighter jets, okay, they might be obsolete. But by the time we get these submarines, the requirement of these submarines might have to be able to deal with underwater drones, and definitely shooting down drones from under the sea, right? because that is going to become the thing, because that is the thing now. That's what's happening in Ukraine. Certain tanks aren't doing well. The Leopard tanks, the 2A6, fantastic in open country, not so good in the tree lines going against drones. The 2A5, better against the drones, not so great in open country. So basically the 2A5 is the Swedish version of the Leopard, right? And basically, this is what the Ukrainians are telling us. No, you need something that is going to have the protection of the 2A5, but the accuracy and hunter killer of the 2A6. You need to make that tank into one. Well, they've done it. It's called the 2A8 that's coming out now from Germany, right? Because it has electronic warfare on it so that the drones don't get it. So if it's easy to take out a tank with drones, okay, you got to think of how tough a tank is, right? And the thing is that if it's that easy to do that, okay, and it's that hard to defend these things, what kind of chance is a warship going to have against hypersonic missiles and stuff like that? So it means your submarine fleet is the only way to really evade hypersonic missiles. But when you have these, what the hell's the name of that speed Russian torpedo? I keep thinking Kinzhal, but Kinzhal is the air one. What the hell is it? It's called so right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, you got those things in the water. Obviously, no warship can outrun them. No warship can outrun most torpedoes, let alone a hyper torpedo. It starts with a K. Anyway, these things do, like I say, 300 to 700 nautical miles an hour underwater in this bubble. And if that hits your ship, it's just a shock from it hitting your ship will knock it in half, right? They're designed to basically destroy aircraft carriers. So aircraft carriers, we're about to find out, like if Trump goes after Iran, you're going to find out aircraft carriers are obsolete because the cruise missiles can outrun the aircraft carrier. Look, even the Houthis were able to basically hold off the U.S. Gerald Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built. And they lost, F-18s off the deck trying to maneuver around these cheaper, older cruise missiles, and anti-shipping missiles. And again, the Houthis were firing these missiles, one at a time, like softball. If they fired 100 at a time, there's no outrunning that. So any sort of surface ship is going to get taken out. You're really down to have to keep your surface ships, like I've said, two opposing warships 1,000 miles away from each other are too close because the cruise missiles make it 1,000 miles, right? But the thing about the submarine is still really difficult to find. Really awesome movie, Hunter Killer, right? Give me an idea. Now I know it's a movie, so there's a lot of bullshit in there. But for example, in the Arctic, one big problem you have is submarines hiding in the ice, like literally hiding in like ice caverns, because the ricochet of the echo honing in on something sonar wise is very difficult up there because of that, right? So these are things that warships are going to have to contend with. You have a submarine hiding in just under an ice bank somewhere, fires a tether line torpedo, where just like the Torpedo 2000 Mark 48s can do this. The F-21 torpedo, which I think is the torpedo Canada should start gearing up for, which is basically a French torpedo. It's a little bit heavier and a little bit longer than the Mark 48, but it's like the hyper version of the Mark 48 versus Torpedo 2000, which is Torpedo 2000 is basically Mark 48 with a remote line on it. But you could basically with these torpedoes, whether it was in the Scorpion submarine or the latest and greatest French submarine now, what these torpedoes could do is they could tether out. Seawolf can do this. Virginia class can do this. And let's say there's a big flotilla of warships and supply ships like you saw in World War II, right? The submarine can hide under a flotilla or whatever, put the torpedo under a whole bunch of ships on a tether line until it comes nice and silently sitting there waiting as a trap for a warship to come over, and then just you detonate it like a sea mine. They're unstoppable. You know what I mean? That's the type of technology that a submarine can bring, right? You just, like there's no warship that's going to be able to counter that. It's just, and we haven't really seen submarine warfare to its max yet. We've seen World War II. So let's say Canada had Type 7 German U-boats for our Navy right now, right? Against the most modern Navy frigates and stuff like that. How would it do? Well, it probably wouldn't do very well because it'd be detected right away. But what it would be able to evade is like cannons, right? Deck guns. Why? Because you could stay submerged. So let's say you had 100 U-boats, right, against the entire U.S. fleet. Well, you get destroyed. Well, let's say you had 500 U-boats against the entire U.S. fleet, sitting waiting in ambush. By the time you detect these things, they've already fired, basically ballistic torpedoes at you, non-guided. But your aircraft carriers are going to get hit. Everything's going to get hit. You might get almost every U-boat, right? But the U-boats can still get close enough to you that even if you know they're coming, if you have a wolf pack or an orca pack of submarines coming at you, you're going to be sending those helicopters out really quick. Problem is when the U-boats are on the surface, they can shoot down the helicopters, right? So at that point, your sub-hunters are going to be really, really busy. Would they be able to stop them all? Probably not. And that's World War II technology. Now, let's say it was the Type 21 U-boat, right? The best submarine of World War II that didn't really get it basically arrived too late. It's a lot quieter. It could stay under the ocean in snorkeling mode. So again, you would detect it coming 100 miles out, but it'd be even harder to get. And probably most of them would be successful about sinking your fleet, even if you lost every one of them. Now let's get out of that and into Canada's, Auburn class submarines. Okay, those things can stay submerged for weeks, for 3 weeks. Like a week or whatever they were at the time, and now they have torpedoes that can track you, like the Mark. They were able to fire the Mark 54, the Mark 48. Probably, I think it was Mark 54s that they did. So the Mark 54 is like the short range midget version of the Mark 48. So those things, okay, they're a little bit harder to detect than the U-boats, but you're going to detect them, right? Now the question is, let's say there's 20 of those, because we'll just say there's 20 of those going after a modern U.S. fleet. You'll probably get all 20 of them, but you will lose probably half your fleet in that process just because the torpedoes are more advanced. Okay, now let's go with the Upholder Virginia class submarines. We have 4. Okay, fine. Put it up against the best that the United States has to offer. And what that says is, yes, we'll lose all 4 submarines, but considering there's 18 torpedoes per submarine, talking about 72 targets, you have a potential of losing 72 vessels. What is the cost of life on that? And basically, the Canadian Navy has surfaced basically in impact has surfaced their submarines beside, like, for example, in the South China Sea, we surfaced right beside a French warship. They had no idea we were there. They had no clue. And this wasn't an old warship. This was modern French Navy which is just as capable as a U.S. warship. Maybe doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but close enough, right? So yes, a really good submarine commander, and even 80s technology upgraded. There's a reason why our submarines are called Canada's most potent weapon. It's because it is. You know what I mean? It's our ultimate stealth machine, right? It's better than any of our frigates because it can get closer to the enemy. So the thing is that anytime you do hear a little bit of PR about the submarine, it's usually here's the day in the life of or whatever. But every now and then you hear about some operational stuff, and it's just like, yes, Canadian submarines are getting that close to their opponents, right? We did sink one of our older frigates or whatever. I forget which one it was, but anyway, it was one of the HMS frigates that we sunk in RIMPAC with a torpedo, and you saw what the Mark 48, a live Mark 48 torpedo could do. That was one hit on a frigate, and it was just like, okay, there's no U.S. frigate today that would be able to survive a hit from that same torpedo. That's what they do with a lot of old warships in the RIMPAC thing, is basically, the Japanese Navy's there, we're there, the German Navy's there, pretty much all the NATO navies are there, and everybody brings their old warships. What they do is they gut the warship, they tow the warship there, or they sail the warship there, and then they strip everything out of it, get all the fuels, everything like that, and it's just basically a floating barge. So when they sink it, it can turn into a coral reef, 100 years down the road type of thing, with toxicities in it. So they have to actually clean the vessel. They have to drain everything toxic out of it that they can, right? And just let it rust at the bottom of the ocean. But navies get to sink their own stuff. So when you see the power of these weapons, where the future is going to lie is in the torpedo that has a 100-mile range, right? You'll never detect a submarine from 100 miles away, no matter what. You know what I mean? Unless, or a modern one anyway. So now let's say the U-212s. Let's say we upgraded to the German U-212s and 214s. Well, they're about the same age as our SKSs, so there's no real thing there. But like I say, if we do a joint venture with the Germans, maybe we can keep both of these, mothball ours. We won't completely decommission them, but we'll mothball them for now. Maybe we keep one rotating or whatever, but put our effort into keeping the German submarine fleet running because it has a little bit more parts availability. It's a little more established, whatever. And then we can keep the German fleet going, our fleet going, do joint ventures with, Rheinmetall to keep, we're going to build Torpedo 2000, which I think the German U-boats that are current can fire. Ours can't. So I think they can fire both the Mark 48 and the Torpedo 2000. I think we can fire it through our tube. Problem is our tube might not be long enough for that torpedo because you got 3,600 pounds of 21 feet long torpedo there, right? 660 millimeter torpedoes or whatever they are. Don't quote me on the actual size of them, but it's roughly where the Mark 48 I think is 18 or 19 feet long. So there's a few feet difference there. So that's what I'm thinking is the best deal. And the thing is that training on the German U-boat makes a lot of sense in that kind of thing. The new German U-boat, when it comes out, where the South Koreans have the advantages, they already got 4 of the vessels that they're going to be selling to us. They've already got 4 demos for us to try and do cross training on as well. Where the new German U-boat hasn't been built yet. But the thing is the ones that are existing are going to. This is basically what the German U-boat that they're going to be building is basically slightly larger than what they have now, but it's going to be built on similar technology. So transitioning to that boat's going to be, probably easier. However, the boat isn't even built yet. You know what I mean? Where the South Koreans have the boat. The problem is to service our submarines in South Korea all the time. That's a pain in the ass to get those submarines over there. But the South Koreans, what they're offering is that no, you'll have a full, when you buy the submarine, you're going to have a parts supply chain and a full service center in Canada, so that you don't have to come to South Korea to service your vessels, right? And obviously that's what Canada would need, because it's the same problem that Germany. This is why Germany wants to do the partnership with us. So it's not just selling us the submarine and then see you later. What it is that no, in like World War III, if we have to take out the Russian Navy, right, and they've destroyed our ports and our supply chain, we got Canada backing us up. So Canada, we could meet them at somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic and help them reload their submarines or whatever. Okay, well then that would bring Canada into the war. Not necessarily, because our supply ship pulled up beside a German supply ship, and these supply ships are identical. Our supply ships are an Italian-German design, right? And it's a Procure class, right? The German Navy is pretty big, right? And the thing about Germany is they're kind of like our number 2 weapons procurement. Like we buy Leopard tanks from them. We've done cross training with the Germans for years, the Brits, whatever. But the Germany and Canada are very intertwined military stuff. A lot of people don't know that. We already have partnerships with them on a lot of stuff. So South Korea is just a new partner, right? The thing is our outgoing partner might be the United States, right? Because you have to understand, when we make a deal on anything, if Donald Trump wants to play hardball, and he can, he'll just say, no more parts. Canada's a threat. They're a threat to NORAD, so you're kicked out of NORAD. I don't know if the United States could get us kicked out of NATO. I wish they could. I don't want to be in NATO. NORAD, yes. But if we're going to be out of NORAD, because Trump has to hurt us, right? Because he hates Canada and he needs Canada to collapse so he can buy us out. That's what the whole 51st state thing is. Why? Because they need the resources. That's all it's about. That's what the whole 51st thing. A lot of people dismiss it, but it's no, you have to think about it. What is Canada? Let me describe Canada to you, okay? Canada is a really out of touch picture like this old lady who everybody likes, okay? Everybody likes her, but she walks around with a $30,000 fur coat with gold chains and necklaces and rings, and the most expensive sunglasses and handbag known to man, and fancy boots, and just oozing this, right? She's really nice to everybody, really polite to everybody. Everybody likes her. She's charitable. She's this, that. She's cooperative, all that thing. But she's walking down a Detroit alley in the middle of the night, right? And she thinks no one's going to hurt her, right? With all these resources on her, right? Well, Canada is the same thing. We're sitting in between Russia, China, and the United States as the battleground if they go at it in World War III, right? Same way it was in the Cold War. And we're full of resources. So you're telling me, if you're to go to Putin, say, Putin, we're going to make you a deal. Get out of the Ukraine. He's like, I don't want to get out of Ukraine. I want Ukraine. Ukraine is mine. We'll give you Canada. Ukraine, you'll love Ukraine. Ukraine this time of year, real nice. Okay, there's field tanks and wheat fields, but you'll love it. See you guys later. Let's go get Canada. Why? Resources. Right? Why do you think the Chinese, the Chinese, yes, they want to capture the Northwest Passage from us. And there's no secret there. Everybody wants the Northwest Passage from Canada. Right? That's why we have our Navy up there, patrol boats, the Harry DeWolf class. We have our Harry DeWolf class, I think, just showed up in Japan. And Donald Trump saying, oh, well, the Canadian military and Navy is nothing, we're protecting them. But it's our icebreakers that are all the way down in Antarctica now saying hello to the Japanese. You know what I mean? We have capability. It's just not as big, But the thing is the main thing for the Arctic, with our submarines now, is they patrol the Arctic looking for smugglers, looking for what do you mean smugglers? Yeah, but it's ships trying to cheat the deal, sneak through illegal shipping and stuff like that. There's lots of it going on up there. That's what Donald Trump is talking about. That's what Pierre Poilievre was talking about, Mark Carney was talking about, that we have to secure the Arctic because people are just going to fucking run rickshaw over us. Like, we need air defenses up there and anti-shipping shorelines. There's 18. Look, the Russians went batshit crazy in 2010 when Obama started to expand NATO into Eastern Europe, right? Whether you like that or don't like that, that's the truth. And what they did when this was under Medvedev, you know the guy, tongue twister there. What he said was, we're opening up Arctic bases. Now, he was only in there for a little bit till 2012. By this time, he passes the keys to Putin, and suddenly you have 18 Cold War bases open up, right, in the Arctic. We've got, I think, 3 up there. Okay, Rankin Inlet, Pond Inlet, I think there's one there, and I think in Iqaluit, right? Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what we got. So we need to open up a few of these old radar stations and stuff like. Alert. We have Alert. My dad's been up to Alert onto that military base. He was a crane operator for a couple of months up there for like 2 months or whatever. Back in it was early 2000s. He went up twice, and basically what he was doing was he was like contractor, a crane operator, right, offloading the ships for the Canadian military. And my dad has nothing to do with the military. It was just they needed civilian contractors, and he was just happened to be one of them. So they're like, okay. So ships come in, they'd unload the ships, and that was it. And then they tore down some. He was also, heavy equipment operator, so they tore down some old buildings and whatever. And then that was the end of it, and he came back. So since that time, I'm sure they've built a lot of new stuff up there. Some of the stuff we're going to have to build is these radar stations, and we're going to have to find out if these Australian over the horizon radar stations are going to be any good in the Arctic. Canada already builds Arctic for Antarctica. We're already building like satellite dishes that function in the Arctic. We're already doing that stuff. Americans rely on that. This is the stuff like that pisses me off so much when I hear Trump going on about how horrible Canada is. It's a nothing country and stuff like. It's like it's so insulting because like when you realize what Canada does bring to the table, it's just like you couldn't operate without it. You know what I mean? Like you couldn't operate without it. Okay, yeah, it's great to have these satellites and stuff like that, but when if you don't have the proper satellites and people maintaining these things to get that data, you don't have that data, right? So submarines are going to be a big part of the future of warfare until there's like the ultimate submarine killer, which will be probably some sort of drone submarine. It'll get to the point where the AI, it'll be like these AI drones that, okay, they go out on patrol and then one goes nuts, and then all of a sudden, like, it tells all the other, drones, hit anything in the sea. So, like, cruise boats, fishing boats, you name it, big freighters, whatever, tankers are just going to get freaking blown up. And everybody like, who's doing this? It's the Russians. No, the Russians will be like, no, it's the Americans. No, it's like we find out it's like, like basically underwater Terminators that are, it's basically Skynet went live underwater, and now they're all rogue, and we have to track down all these freaking underwater drones to destroy them. But I think the submarine is going to be the last man standing in terms of warfare, because any modern submarine coming out now has to do more than the World War II torpedo, right? And the Mark 48 is just the ultimate pinnacle of and design of the German U-boat. That's, whether you're talking Seawolf, the Yasen class, the Barracuda class, the Vanguard class, whatever their fast attacks are. I forget what they're because they have two, Vanguard class and the I always get the two British nuclear submarines mixed up. One's a super attack sub, and the other one is like the boomer sub. So you guys in the UK can tell me which one is which again. But anyway, but the point is that those things now, like, and it really gets, like, Virginia class sub is the first sub to really hone in on this. where it's like, okay, you have to take your destroyer, take it off the surface, and get below. So, what's the difference between an Ollie Burke class destroyer um, and a Virginia class submarine? 10 feet of water. That's it. That's it. 10 feet of water. It's literally 10 feet of water. That's probably, if you took the submarine from the top of the sail with the periscope up all the way down to the bottom of the hull to the keel. Well, it doesn't really have a keel, but where we call it the keel, and you did the same thing, it's probably going to be about 10 feet of water. So the sub just has to be like 10 feet deeper to be submerged. That's it. Or maybe 20 feet, whatever it is. Right? But you see that these giant underwater leviathans, such as like the mighty Typhoon sub and stuff like that, which the Russians are still using them. I mean, yeah, sure, they got their newer stuff, but like they're still using hotel class submarines, just modified, and turning them into cruise missile submarines and stuff like that, right? Because you have it, might as well use it, right? But the thing is these are older subs that are more like a secondary line. So Bory's going to be the front line with the Bolivia missiles and stuff like that. But to protect the Bory's, you have to have these fast attack subs. So the Akula 1s, 2s, and 3s, they're starting to make a lot of noise for their age. You need these smaller Yazin class subs, but the Yazin class sub can't just be a hunter killer. It has to also be useful enough to do deep strikes, cruise missile strikes, caliber missile strikes wherever they want. And I'm sure they're doing them in the Ukraine, and Ukraine's probably thinking these caliber missiles are coming from, aircraft or whatever, but a lot of them are probably coming from submarines, and just nobody in the Baltics has detected it yet, right? But let's talk about the Baltics. Do you want a giant submarine in the Baltics, or do you want a small diesel electric boat that's really hard to spot and can get really, get into the deep water, but can get into the shallow water, right? It's all going to come down to what dives deeper, what dives faster, what can outrun the surface groups, and how far away can it be when it fires its weaponry. Like you have, the French have torpedoes that fire, again, it goes 90% of the way to the vessel, and that last 10%, it pops up out of the water, and then while they're doing countermeasures for torpedoes, suddenly they got that torpedo turns into a cruise missile, or like an exocet missile or something like that. Very, 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 very interesting way to attack a vessel, right? So you could basically fire 2 torpedoes and get 2 different, a high speed, at short range attack on a vessel with these torpedo cruise missile things. The Russians have a caliber version of it. They have all these torpedo missiles as well. The Americans have a version of it. Everybody, the British, I'm sure they have a version of it. Problem is they're extremely expensive to make. Nothing, like if you got like a frigate and a supply vessel, well, maybe you use the frigate and destroyer, you use the and the aircraft carriers, you use these cruise missile anti-shipping missiles, to come up this way, and then the other one is like it's a torpedo, and then like I say, at the last minute it pops up out of the water, and now you've got like a Mach 2, Mach 3 cruise missile that you can't stop at short range, and then you finish everything off with a conventional torpedo, right? So the idea with the cruise missiles is mainly to blind the frigates and stuff like that. But the Scorpion sub, again, was probably one of the first submarines to do cruise missiles out of the bow, right? Out of the torpedo tubes. Now everything is VLS, which makes much more sense. But those submarines are the new versions of submarines coming in online now. And one thing is that the VLS on the Kaesong is 10 missiles, which those 10 missiles, like the torpedoes, may never get used. The torpedoes are going to go from an offensive weapon to probably a defensive weapon, kind of what the Russians have done with their submarine, where it's like, okay, well, our submarine basically has 16, anti-aircraft, anti-ship missiles that can come out, and then we have 40 either cruise missiles or anti-shipping missiles, whatever, and 30 medium-ranged heavy torpedoes. and maybe, or 20 of those and 10 of those high speed torpedoes. I can't think. It was when they were when the Kursk got sunk. It was the torpedo that they were doing. It's what is it freaking called? Anyway, that torpedo. They're unstoppable. Anyway, they're so fast, they're uncounterable. Once they're in the firing envelope, you can't counter them. But the thing is that the new navies are going to have to be large submarine fleets. Problem is, submarine is the most expensive thing your navy can typically run. But that said, the diesel electric boats, one of the advantages with them is they're cheaper to run. And starting with the Swedes with their Gotha class or whatever they're called, those things, yes, they're a small vessel. They'd be just about perfect for Canada, but they're just about as old. So, you know what I mean? The thing is the Swedes have upkept their vessels a little bit better than ours because they have their own industry. Sub industries is everything. Like, the way I would be looking at the Canadian military going forward is a one-all kind of package. Rather than buying this from this group, this country, or this country, and this country, kind of like do it all from one. So that integration of the software is so much easier, which Canada develops a lot of the software ourselves and enjoy with other countries or whatever. Like, I mean, a lot of software in the F-35 is from Canada, stuff like that. So again, you look into what we've contributed, remember there's like 10 or 11 nations in on the F-35, right? Go look at the mock-up airplane. You'll see all the flags on the side of it. I think we have one of those mock-up airplanes at the Ottawa Aviation Museum. Don't quote me on that. We had it there for a little bit. I don't know. I think it goes around on display, different museums. Maybe a bunch of them were made. They're not the actual aircraft. They're just a mock-up, right? A life-size mock-up. But the thing is getting back to the deal, like with South Korea is like, and again, if there's a country that knows how to wine you and dine you for trade deals, it's them. Remember, that small peninsula is the fourth largest exporter of weapons in the world. It's hard to believe they make that much stuff. But the thing is that one advantage we have with them is they already have a submarine that we can go and train on with them, and say, okay, let's see if this thing really, truly meets our needs. But the Germans also have submarines that are going to be very similar to what they're about to be building. The problem is their first prototype's not going to be around for, at best, 10 years, right? So 10 years, make it 15, right? So I'm thinking that the South Korean sub might be a better deal, but I think we should still do a partnership to do cross-training on the remaining German U-boats, park ours for now, and just go all in on that. And that would be better because it helped Germany out with its supply chain. We can make a little money and trade off, say, maybe training time for money and, stuff like that. There's things both countries could get a mutual benefit in. And that's how a trade deal is supposed to be, is mutually benefited, or else it don't work, right? But the thing is we could figure out, and what we could also do is pit the case on, say, okay, South Korea, we know we only have 4 of those, but for 6 weeks out of the year, okay, for the whole year, we're going to have rotating Canadians training on one of your submarines. Okay? Whether we buy the submarine or not. We need to know, we need ground crews to learn how to work on these things, all that stuff. Now, would they go for this deal? I don't know, but we'll have to throw something in to sweeten the pot to make them say yes. One of the things is that they might just do it because it's like, well, hey, if we do this, we'll give them a reasonable timeline so that we say, well, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll train up our guys on your submarine. We're going to train up our guys on their current submarine, and we're going to put these 2 submarines head to head. So the U-214 against the Kaesong KSS-3, okay? And they're going to do a friendly war game in either the Canadian Arctic, somewhere in the South Pacific, because they're already there. And maybe it takes 2 years to complete this, whatever. And then we're going to do, submarine against submarine, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. And just, we'll be able to evaluate both of these vessels perfectly. So, okay, it's a little bit of an unfair advantage to the Germans because that's not the product that they're going to be selling us, but we can get an idea if we like German technology or not. But we're going to get that idea anyway because it doesn't matter what sub you buy. They're both based on the 212. They're based on the Dolphin class German submarines, right? These SSKs. I'm a huge fan of the SSK. You know what I mean? I say just build lots of them. And then it's going to come down to cost and like that. But if the German submarine that is proposed is going to have all these really interesting stealth features that might make it the quietest submarine ever known to man, yeah, maybe we want to be in on that development with the Germans as well. Maybe we do that, but maybe we don't buy the sub, but maybe let's make money on it, right? If the Germans would go for it. So it's hard to say how this deal could be done. But what could be done right now is you could have Canadian sailors on German submarines and say like starting today. Okay, 6 months from now or a year from now. Okay, we're going to have Canadian sailors on. Okay, it's Monday right now. Okay, next Monday we're sending out some Canadian sailors, a full complement of sailors, to be trained on the German U-boats. Right, their most advanced one. The one closest to the design that they're about to replace their boats with, which I have a hunch that a lot of stuff is going to be, the Germans aren't going to reinvent the wheel here. They're going to take a lot of common parts and, put it towards this new vessel. And while we do that, we're going to send a bunch of full complement of Canadian Navy to be trained on the KSS-3. Okay? Give them a year training each or whatever it takes to bring them up to speed. Maybe it's 2 years. I don't know. But we'll say at least a year's training before we have the war game between the two submarines, right? And try to do as much cross-training in other participating stuff up until that time to get the best version of what submarine we're going to get. I think that's the way to do it. Time-consuming, sure, but it means Canada will get the best submarine for its thing. Now, which submarine? Okay, like with the Saab Gripen and the F-35, I gave you my bias in favor of the F-35, the Saab Gripen because it's a more practical, and it's the spin-offs we're going to get with the Saab stuff is probably going to be far exceed. And this is something I like a lot of conservatives, and I'm a conservative man myself, but a lot of conservatives, because they're anti-liberal, make a critique of that, like the Americans' weapon industry and their market is what we want to have a piece of because it's bigger than anything else. And that's true. But you have to understand that's not the way to look at it now, because the thing about Saab is giving us open arms, help us with our industries. We're going to include you and stuff. Now, will they make good on that? We'll see. But so far, the deals we have done with Saab, like with I know it's confusing, but the Gripen, I think G model is the one that is the Bombardier 6500 or whatever, converted into electronic warfare aircraft. That's Canadian tech. That's Canadian tech at its best, right? And they're already working with us with this. So we're already got a foot in the door with them as well, right? So it makes you wonder, well, why aren't we buying our own electronic warfare aircraft? That is a great thing. But from the fall of the Aero, we told the Americans we won't develop our own industries and compete with you, right? So like joint ventures between Saab and say General Electric, that's one of the big problems with the Saab Gripen is they have to now replace it with a Rolls-Royce engine because the General Electric engine has too many caveats to it that we might not even be able to get these Gripens with engines. You know what I mean? So obviously we're not going to buy a fighter that we can't get an engine out of. But we might not be able to get the F-35 Block 5 because it'll be 30 years before they catch up to the to the actual the orders that they got to catch up to, right? So everything is like so far out, but the thing is the Saab jet is closer to us, meaning Saab is already building them. They've got a backlog. They want to build 150 for Ukraine, and Canada can be the assembly plant for those 150. which means we'll have to beef up security there because obviously got to watch out for sabotage and shit, which we could see that as well. But maybe for every 10 sobs or 4 sobs that we build, we get one free for ourselves, meaning we don't have to raise taxes. And then on top of that, what does Saab 2.0, Canadian Saab 2.0? I'm sure we'll make our own. Hey, well, we want this feature in the Saab and that feature in the Saab, like we did with the CF-18. Suddenly, the Canadian Gripen is a slightly different aircraft from theirs. And then the second version of that, what does it look like? Maybe Avro Aero 2.0, right? So Saab has lots to offer. But the South Koreans are offering just about the entire table and their arms open, saying not only are we going to build a supply chain with you and sell you the product, but we're going to sell you the infrastructure to keep that product going. And on top of that, we're also going to have partnership industries for some more supply chain, to help us fill orders and stuff like that. So they're countering Saab as well, and they're countering the Germans. So we got these three really hungry for business, really pandering to Canada because Canada is now opening up the country to business. So we're no longer just taking a backseat to the Americans, which we should have been doing this. We were doing, and then we destroyed the Avro Aero, and that destroyed the concept of Canada becoming self-reliant. But what we're finding out is that it's not even just Canada taking a backseat to American industry in favor of, playing well with our neighbor and because they were our best friends, so to speak. But it's also that they don't want us to buy anything from anybody else, and they want to keep us in line. So not only are we not going to help anybody else, or else we're going to cut this off on you, we'll cut that off on you, do all these, whatever, and you'll sit there and wait for whatever scraps we want to throw you. Again, it's okay, I get it. Yeah, everybody wants a piece of the U.S. market, but you have to also look at it. Is it feasible? Like if you can't get a reliable trade deal, don't waste your time with it. Go to where the people. Sure, it might be a little more expensive to do it the other way, but you're getting partnerships of people that want to cooperate with you, not take you over. You know what I mean? So that's what we have offered to us. But what of the two submarines, the KSS-3 versus the new 412 or whatever U-boat, or 414 U-boat, or whatever it's called, the 400, the 414, whatever it's called, this new stealthy U-boat that is being proposed, which is the best of the two? Well, if I look at just the features on paper, okay, both submarines have a lot to offer. I think the main advantage for the U-boat is going to be this new outer, geometry, stealth geometry that it's going to have, right? To see how well it functions. Maybe it looks better on like everything. Nothing ever works as good as advertised, because if it did, everything would be functional all the time. But it's not, right? That's the thing to keep in mind. Like maybe even with a full supply chain of parts, maybe one submarine could be at sea like 3 times longer just because it's so much more reliable than the other one. You know what I mean? There's that thing. Like, we're going to find this out, but we have to take, the age of the submarines that we're testing, obviously. But I don't know. I'm really tossed between these two submarines. I love the KSS-3, the fact that it has 10 VLSs right on, all that. I like the fact that it's small. It's very quiet. It's super, super advanced. They built this thing to basically sneak into North Korean waters and, to fire cruise missiles at North Korea from close range, right? Or maybe not close range, but, but the sub being so small, what's the max size of a cruise missile you can put in there, right? Range, payload, that kind of thing. So that has to be considered too. That stuff is kind of classified, so you don't know. But just on paper, that looks like a great submarine. The fact that it can do its entire 3-week mission or whatever, it's like 20 days or 21 days, you might as well say 3 weeks, completely submerged, is good. And it has a really long range for such a small submarine. I forget what I saw, but it was like, okay. So the new U-boat, the only thing we could go on is, okay, it's a really cool design. I think it has 5 torpedo doors, which is a weird number, not 6. Where the caisson, I think, is 4 or 6. I forget what I saw. Again, I think it depends on the variant. Like the new Swiss submarine is going to be only 4 torpedoes. I'd rather be able to lob out more torpedoes, but maybe there's a trade-off for this. The current U-boats are 6 torpedoes, right? Which I think is kind of like the buy-in rate for a submarine. Like anything less than that is kind of like, it's kind of a bit of a handicap, right? The Victoria class is 6 torpedoes at a time, six torpedo tubes, right? Which I don't think I'd want to see less than that. I think the Auburn class was 4. It might have had 6, but they were smaller torpedoes. So yeah, the stealthy thing really, really, sells it for me. The fact that it's a slightly larger submarine, but still yet small, it's about the same size of what we have now, which is adequate for Canadian waters. I mean, remember, we have the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, but we also have the Arctic, and you have to understand, like a good proportion of Canadian waters is all in the, in the Grand Banks, right? Which the Grand Banks are really not large vessel friendly, because of those shallow waters of 75 feet for the first 75 miles or so. Yeah, you want to be out past that shelf, right? But having a submarine that can sneak in and sneak out submerged without worrying about bottoming out as much as like the larger submarines is a good idea as well, right? So the fact that you have a 210 foot long submarine or approximately 200 foot long submarine of the South Korean versus a newer submarine that's going to be a little longer than the current U-boat, which is about 240 feet. Again, we'll have to wait until the actual prototype is built. But, that could offer extra capabilities with extra space. Now, for actual dorsal fin VLS cruise missile things, launchers, again, the prototype isn't built, so we don't know how many they can actually squeeze in there, right? But what we can say that if it can be built, to fire cruise missiles. Maybe it can only fire 8 cruise missiles, but they're larger, full-size cruise missiles because it's a slightly larger vessel, but yet not too big. So it's going to be smaller than the Virginia class, but bigger than, and maybe smaller than the current Upholder class, but it might be big enough to fire modern, extremely long range cruise missiles, right? Say Storm Shadow, Tomahawks, etc., or whatever new missile that might be fitted around 2035. So that's what we have to look at. So for me right now, I don't know which one would be better, but if they both work as good as advertised, I don't think we can go wrong with either. If maybe the caisson might be a little bit cheaper. And if it is, or the KSS-3, if it's called the caisson, I think it's called the caisson. But if it's called the caisson and I'm wrong, not called the caisson, I'm wrong, I apologize. But that's the KSS-3 is what they're calling it. So if we can look at that thing and evaluate it in real world against a submarine that's going to be replaced by a better version of what it is, the German U-boats, and all of them share similar DNA because the KSS-3 was from the German Dolphin class designs, right? So we can say which one works better, which one's more practical, which one costs cheaper to run, stuff like that, but which one's actually just more effective tool to the job. And that's going to take time. Right now, nobody can give you that answer until the prototype is built with the German one, but that could be 10 years out. The thing is the boats that we could train on now are already here. Hence why I'm more for a stopgap thing. What I think Canada should do to get 12 submarines is buy maybe those, if they're still functioning fairly well, and we can keep them going, maybe buy those 3 Chilean submarines. You know what I mean? And yes, okay, you have a multi-fleet there, but you can get a maintenance thing going fairly. Like it's not going to be that much more difficult to offset the maintenance setup. You know what I mean? Like it's not going to be that much more. Maybe we can get 2 or 3 of those because there's not too many of them. German U-boats. I say maybe we get 2 of them over here, maybe 3 of them over here, doing the cross training and all that, lend lease or joint venture where, okay, we're going to use the German boats, but what we're going to do is train both navies, and both countries will keep these boats running. Okay, right there you would have about 6. Maybe we can get another 3 Scorpions, and we'd have, between the Victoria and the Scorpions, we'd have 10, and then maybe possibly another 2 or 4 from Germany. That'd give us our 12, right? And then we could have the 12 vessels doing the jobs, and then wait for the replacements. You know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of things we can do here. Maybe we get lend lease from the South Koreans of 2 of their vessels. I don't think they would do that because that would leave them short. By 2 vessels, they only have 4, and they need them. But you get the idea. So anyway, you guys let me know what you think. What's the better boat for Canada? All that good stuff. I gotta get some stuff done in here. I don't want to waste all my day. I got some stuff done today, so it's like, but I gotta get a little bit more, including recording. So anyway, there we go.